You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Michelle Jewel Shaw, award-winning volunteer for Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Jeremy, and hello to all of our listeners out there.
Today is February 18th, 2024, and this is episode 265 of Lighthearted. In a few minutes, we're going to listen to two interviews that relate to what happened to Whale Rock Lighthouse in Rhode Island in the hurricane of 1938. I want to wish everyone a happy President's Day weekend. Do you have any special plans for the weekend, Michelle?
No, so it's not a holiday weekend for me or anything, so because we have to work on Monday, but just meeting up at the lighthouse to go look at, assess some of the damage and working. Those are my plans for the weekend.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to take a look at Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse, get more of an assessment of the damage there that was done in the storms a few weeks ago and so forth. So that'll be interesting. But you don't have the day Monday off from school?
Nope, we've never gotten President's Day off, so we have February vacation the following week. So
okay. Yeah, I was thinking it was a school holiday, but it shows what I know. I'm out of touch with the schools these days. So anyway, we'll enjoy February vacation when that comes.
Yes, definitely looking forward to that.
I'll bet. So we have two very interesting interviews today, and I want to get right into the introduction. Please help me out, Michelle.
Sure, Jeremy. Standing offshore at the entrance to the West Passage of Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island are the twisted remains of the foundation of Whale Rock Lighthouse. The ruins can also be regarded as a memorial to Walter Eberle, the keeper who lost his life in the most terrible of all 20th century New England storms.
Whale Rock Light, a typical cast-iron spark plug type lighthouse, was constructed in 1882 to help mariners past a treacherous reef. 15 years before the lighthouse was built, a schooner had hit the rocks, killing 5 of the 6 men aboard.
Isolated Whale Rock was not a desirable location for keepers, and 16 different men served as head keeper between 1882 and 1909. A 1924 storm sent waves over the top of the tower and did some damage to the structure, but that storm was nothing compared to what was to come in 1938.
Walter Barge Eberle, assistant keeper at Whale Rock Light in 1938, was a 20-year Navy veteran and master diver. Born in Webster City, Iowa in 1898, Eberle had run away from home and lied about his age to enter the Navy at age 15.
In 1937, Eberle entered the lighthouse service and was assigned to Whale Rock, a welcome assignment since it was close to his home in Newport. Eberle and his wife, Agnes, had 6 children. On September 21, 1938, Keeper Eberle saw that the seas were growing rough around Whale Rock.
Because of the conditions, he had left the mainland earlier than had been scheduled to relieve Keeper Dan Sullivan at the lighthouse. With practically no advance warning, a devastating hurricane was bearing down on New England's south-facing coast. The waves grew higher and higher as the Hurricane of 38 battered the tower.
It was a long, anxious night for the Eberles. At about 5:30 in the morning, Keeper Daniel Sullivan phoned the family. His words were to the point. The light is gone. More than 700 people died in the hurricane, mostly on New England's south-facing coast.
Many days passed before the seas calmed down enough to get a boat out to Whale Rock. The lighthouse was completely gone, and to this day, the body of Walter Eberle has not been found. Eberle was 40 years old and had been in the lighthouse service for 1 year. The first of the two interviews we're going to hear today was recorded way back in 2001. At that time, I interviewed the surviving children of Walter Eberle. I was interviewing them for an article I was writing. I didn't worry too much about the technical quality of the interview, but I recently had it digitized, and I think it stands up pretty well. It's just under a half hour. The woman who did most of the talking in the interview was Dorothy Roach, also known as Dottie or Dot. She was the oldest daughter of Walter Eberle, and she had very clear memories of the hurricane of 1938. Dorothy passed away in 2012, and I'm glad I had the chance to record her memories. Let's listen to my 2001 interview with Dorothy Roach and the other children of Walter Eberle now. If you could, we could maybe talk about his history just before he joined the lighthouse service, what his past was.
He was retired, a 20-year retired Navy. He was a chief petty officer.
Yep.
He was in the submarine service too.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he was a diver.
He was a master diver.
Okay.
submarine service, and he was a,
I do have his naval records,
I think he was a chief gunner's mate.
and yeah, because he lied to get into the Navy.
He ran away from home.
Huh.
And,
At what age?
15, I think. 15. Yeah. And he lied to get into the Navy, and they didn't find out till he was already over the age where he needed to be in the Navy, so they let him stay.
He said he was 18 when he was 15, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, because he was born, what, 1898.
His father was a doctor
doctor.
from Webster City, Iowa.
Born in 1898,
Right.
and you say his father was a doctor,
Yeah.
Yes.
His father was a doctor.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. and you probably remember him as his father.
No,
No,
we
we
didn't.
never met
He
him.
ran away from home, and they kind of disowned him, I guess, because we never heard about our grandparents there.
So that has something to do with him leaving home at 15, apparently.
Yes, right. Definitely. The only one we heard about, he had a sister,
Mhm.
Miriam Pickard.
So they're just the two. Walter just had one sister.
He was
Just
just
the
the
two
two
of
of
them.
them.
And they had no children.
So he was in the Navy for 20 years, or
20
a little,
years.
little
Yeah.
more than that?
20 years, yeah.
He came out of the Navy, and I guess it was still the depression going on or something, because he had a hard time finding a job.
Right.
And I remember that he did get a job for a short time in a gum factory. Because
the gum.
because he used to bring home wads before they were cut of wiggly spearmint gum.
Where the gum factory was,
And
I don't know.
But somewhere in what area?
Well,
we lived in Newport,
Newport, yeah.
so it couldn't have been too far from there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. He used to give it to us, and we were the kids used to love us because we had gum all
The gum you did want, yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
Now this is, what are we talking about here? In the 30s?
In the 30s, yeah.
Yeah.
That would be 36, 37.
Yeah, in that area.
Mhm. So I guess he,
The year before he went into the lighthouse. Because I remember when he went to interview. I just remember there was an interview. I didn't know, what it was all about. And when he had come back and he had a job.
now do you know what made him decide to go in the lighthouse service?
A job.
Yeah.
He
And
loved
maybe
the
more
sea.
interested in the
He
gum
loved-
factory for
he
him.
He loved the
it.
water.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. He always said he was going to bury
He
in
would-
the water.
He was kind of in tune with the water. He could tell when storms were coming and stuff like that.
He loved the ocean.
You say he always said he wanted to be buried in the
He
ocean?
always
or?
said he was going to die
go
in
in-
the ocean. He had a very close call right off the coast of Newport in a submarine.
When he was in submarine duty, because we didn't have 95 at that time, and it was a long track to go from Newport to go to submarine in New London. And he had gotten up past Providence at one time when he forgot some salt pork that he had left at home that he was supposed to be bringing in. And he turned around and came back all the way to Newport to get the salt pork and then went. Well, he missed the submarine, and the submarine was never sighted again.
Wow.
But he was actually on the submarine too when it went down.
It's two different cases.
Yeah.
So he missed the submarine.
Yeah,
was
but he was
lost.
in submarine duty.
That was in what, maybe the 20s or something like that? Or
Oh, God, that
who
was...
knows? Yeah, somewhere during his
Late 20s was like
Well, the late 20s, because I can remember that.
But another time he was on a submarine that.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
was on the submarine. It was not too far from where Whale Rock was because it's down in Newport, right around the drive. They have what they call a fisherman's memorial.
Mm-hmm.
You familiar with that?
I was telling
Well, he was telling me about it. I was familiar with the
Well,
Portuguese.
it's kind of archaic, I suppose, where that memorial is, because if you look out at a certain angle, it is
Whale Rock.
You could see it from the Ocean Drive.
And if you looked out the other way, is where that submarine that he was on had gone down.
Go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say, when the submarine went down, was everybody rescued or?
They got out. I know what happened. I don't know exactly, but they were able to get
Get them
rescued.
off.
Yeah.
I remember when he was in the submarine division at the time, but his chore was to dive for dud torpedoes over at the around the torpedo station in Newport, Rhode Island.
Goat Island.
Well, the torpedo station was on Rhode Island.
Was
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
Goat Island, yeah. But he used to be the one that would go down and dive for the ones that didn't go off.
Oh boy.
Because I remember at home, remember the
we had
diving helmet?
Big
Oh, we used to
diving
have big,
helmet
yeah.
though.
Yeah, the ocean was his love.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any other stories about his Navy days that you think?
I remember him always marching in the parade, and he always was on the side, with his
saber.
battalion.
Yeah, with his
Yeah,
saber.
and every time he would see us kids, he would wink as he went by because he couldn't break formation or anything.
Well, see, a lot of the Newport Naval Training.
Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
training the recruits.
He did. He used
Yeah.
to train,
Okay,
and it was a certain day they would have the drills.
Yeah.
Because Ma and those of us that were here used to go over there. In fact, we lived on the training station for a while. I remember that. That was I had to be very small. One time he came home.
There's a little bit of the recording missing here. Dorothy talks about her father being away when he was in the Navy for some months, and he came back with a monkey.
Or it might have been even a year. She took one look at him and the monkey and she said, "The monkey goes." I remember that so distinctly because we were so upset that the little monkey, and was it really a monkey? It was one of those cute little ones.
With a spider monkey.
Like a little spider monkey.
Right. Kind of like an organ grinder.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah.
The monkey goes, she said.
Yeah, the monkey goes.
The little guy can stay.
But he was always doing things like that.
Uh-huh.
At one time, he wanted to bring home from Yakima, Washington, a little pony for us, but she wouldn't hear of it.
Mm. So it sounds like he had enjoyed his life in the
Oh,
Navy.
he did.
Yeah, he did, and he loved his kids.
Yes.
He loved his kids. Used to walk the beach with them.
In fact, that's something that we tell our children and our grandchildren and say, if your grandmother and grandfather were alive, they would have loved you. They loved children.
Mm-hmm.
In a good sense.
He used to get up in the morning when he was home, and he would make breakfast. And what I remember mostly about breakfast, he used to make corn pancakes.
Corn fritters.
It was like
Johnny cakes, like they
Yeah,
call them.
probably a lot like that.
But it was his own version,
Uh-huh.
know.
I don't like Johnny cakes. This was probably better.
Yeah.
I had like paper.
Oh, they were so
Yeah.
good. They were so good. And he used to always, when he had corn on the cobs, cut the
cut it off,
corn
yeah.
down,
Mhm.
not chew it like
My
we.
grandmother used to do that.
Yeah, he used to do that all the time.
So in '37, he went into the lighthouse.
He went
Yeah,
back to the
around
lighthouse,
that,
somewhere around 37. Yeah.
And what did the family think of that at the time? It seemed like a good
It
idea.
was at that time. That time it was a job. He was out of the Navy, He came home so many days and was off so many days with the schedule that they had.
Mm-hmm.
So we enjoyed it.
Now, was he? Did he spend any time in any other lighthouses besides Whale
No.
Rock in that year? Just
No.
from-
Just
Just
that
that
one.
And he was. What was he? His official title? Just assistant
He was
keeper.
the
He was the
assistant.
assistant.
They didn't have. Some places have first and second assistant keepers there. I
No,
guess.
it
Probably
was
had the
just
head
two of
keeper.
them.
There was only two of them.
Did any of you go out there?
My older brother. I don't know. Did you go?
No, I don't think
No.
so. I don't remember.
My older brother used to go a couple of times.
What's his name?
Walter.
Walter.
He just died.
Walter
He just
Jr.
died.
Mm-hmm. Was
Last
he Walter Jr.? So,
Yes, Walter.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was doing it.
so he spent a little time out there.
He spent time on the lighthouse with his father.
Mm-hmm. Did he enjoy it, from what you remember?
Yeah, but evidently, it was quite tricky to get onto the light.
Mhm.
Well, they evidently had something swinging out
Well, that's
from the
the
light.
Davits for the boat.
Uh-huh.
You had to
Right.
go up on the Davits, I think, because you were all rocks underneath there.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
and he found that quite, slippery and
Yeah.
challenging,
Sure it
I
was,
guess.
Yeah, sure it was really, really difficult to get on and off.
But I remember him talking about that growing up there.
Any stories about his days, at Whale Rock as a keeper?
He used to spend a lot of time crabbing. I remember he used to always be crabbing and bringing the jars home when he came home. No, it's just that he really enjoyed it.
And like you say, he wasn't on that long.
Yeah, he might be on for 3 days and
Yeah.
off for 4.
Boy,
So he probably planned to spend the rest of his career in the lighthouse
I
service?
wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah. More than likely.
Yeah, that's fairly typical actually. A lot of lighthouse service people retired military and
Uh-huh.
stuff like that.
But in hindsight now, I would imagine with the war coming, they would have pulled him back
Yeah,
in.
he would have been pulled back in.
Yeah.
Right. That's
in
true
the
too.
Navy, even as an instructor or something.
Yeah.
He was in the active reserves.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was in the active reserve.
Uh-huh. Oh, he was.
Yeah.
If you don't mind my asking, how old were you?
I was 10.
I was 12.
Okay.
I was 5.
You were over on the ocean.
I was
Way with
4.
the sheep.
Yeah, I was 4. Because I hadn't got my birthday yet.
Right.
Right.
My birthday was in December.
I had just turned 10.
Yeah.
It was
I was
about
4.
3:30 in the afternoon when they let us out of school because there was a quote big storm and we were to go right home.
As we're going home, trees were falling.
And the trees were already fallen. There was a little kid next door to us. Joe was it? Little Joe,
Kenny Joseph.
that was missing. We all went hunting. When we got home, my mother and
Her
my
friend.
younger sister Mim and you, I guess,
You had taken a walk down.
my mother had heard the
She was
ocean.
Mrs. Rumowich.
We didn't live that far from the ocean. Had heard it
Mhm.
and went to the Cliff Walk
Okay.
to take a look at it because it.
Bob
you know,
Easton Beach, the roadway down on the hill there.
Mm-hmm.
I remember. I don't really remember, but I kind of vaguely remember water down there.
Yeah, there was a lot of water
Yeah.
down there. I know she had gone with the neighbor, and they had gone to the Cliff Walk, but they had a friend who was a governess
on the
inside
estate.
the gate. There was a gate at the end of Dresser
One of the
Street.
estates.
Yeah,
had
and
a
there was a
gate.
gate, and
Uh-huh.
the governess lived inside there, and they stopped there when the wind was getting so bad.
When they couldn't keep walking, the trees were coming down.
In the meantime, her friend's husband came home and wanted to know where they were. And she told him they went to the Cliff Walk.
So Mr. Rumowich and I foolishly took the car and tried to go find her because all hell's breaking loose. Because we didn't know that she was at the down on the Cliff Walks at this time. We were hunting for her. So the first place we headed for was the Cliff Walk.
Right.
Well, Mr. Rumwich and I, after we had been all over, we'd have to stop and move trees and everything else.
Mhm.
We couldn't find my mother. We thought, well, maybe she went to the beach.
Uh-huh.
So we went to the beach.
That gave you a better view of Cliff Walk, too.
Right. Where the Cliff Walk starts.
Yeah.
Right. The
Uh-huh.
beach.
Mhm.
We were at the top of the hill when the tidal wave went over. Yeah, we had gone down, couldn't find her on the beach, had come back up to the top of the hill
Mm-hmm.
when the tidal wave went over. Well, not one tidal wave, tidal waves went over. I always thought it was one wave. It went clear over from the
reservoir.
beach to the reservoir, which is now a 4 or 5 lane highway.
Mm.
And there were young boys, I don't know how old they were, that were down from New York that used to, well, their families used to rent, I don't know whether tenements or what, but it was a summer deal
Mhm.
that stayed on East Barry Street. And they were down, those kids were down at the beach. And the beach at that time had a boardwalk. And it had, pull the strings and all that stuff. And they had a big penny arcade. And the kids evidently, and I don't know this to be a factual fact, evidently were in robbing the penny arcade.
Huh.
And they were washed out to sea. And it split up there.
So in that wave you saw when you were there, you believe that's when they were.
That's when
That's
they just disappeared. Okay.
What can you describe what that was like seeing a wave of that size?
Awesome. It's something your imagination.
I imagine it very, very frightening to look
It
at.
is.
But you know, it's strange though. Whenever a storm comes, you always go to the ocean to
Yeah.
see it.
Yeah.
Just to see the fury of the
The water,
You know how insignificant you are. Well, this when it went over, it ripped up the entire seawall.
Having experienced that one in '38, and then these little storms that come
they're
along,
nothing.
they're nothing.
Nothing compares, yeah.
Yeah.
You know what it might be though? We had never experienced anything before.
Well, it was the worst storm in recorded New England
Yeah,
history.
it was.
Certainly,
it was
especially
there.
for the South Coast.
Because
Yeah.
down in Newport at the time too, a lot of the streetlights were gas lights,
Mm-hmm.
and It's quite a problem. When
Yeah.
they got knocked over, they had to turn the gas off.
All I can remember is water. And I remember, I mean, I don't know if it's my imagination or that I've been told it so many times that I was on top of that hill and it looked like it was just filled up with water. That's
I remember my mother saying that when they were going for the walk down by the cliff walks, there was a man and he had an Irish setter dog.
Yeah.
And the dog kept pulling back and pulling back. It did not want to go. The dog sensed it. They found both of them dead after. I remember she was telling us she saw that dog trying to pull the man back. And the man just wanted to keep going and going.
Yeah.
And that was the end of them.
But I remember after the hurricane, I remember the trees that were over.
Oh, yeah.
Because a lot of fields used to be in, I know we used to use them as our huts underneath the trees.
Yeah. Finally, I don't remember how we located the mount that was there because the phones were out.
I think,
She stayed there, I know.
no, I think
A long
Mr.
time.
Rumwich realized that they must have stopped there.
Yeah.
And that was, 'cause
Yeah,
they were very good friends. But
All
they
I
got
know,
home.
she was home in the morning. She was home. When she got home, I don't recollect
I think
that.
Daddy had brought her home.
The three of them got home safe. It wasn't until about daybreak, whether it was 6:30 or 5:30 or 6 o'clock, that the phone call came in from Sullivan, he had said, as soon as daybreak broke, he was at the Ocean Drive with his binoculars. He saw the light from there first.
Well,
Then he went to Narragansett.
Well, he was going to relieve Dad. It was his duty be going on. And my father told him to go back.
But
But
Dad
he
wasn't
was-
supposed to have been there.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. He was
Oh,
not.
well, I'm in the after the hurricane.
Right.
He just told him to go.
He knew there was going to be a storm somehow. I don't know.
Oh, the seas were rough then, and that's why he told me to go back. They drove us out, even went on a private estate to get us out there, and you almost think you could have thrown a stone to the
Yeah.
rock. It was seemed to be that close, and you wonder, why couldn't they have gotten off?
Yeah.
But then again, he might not have wanted to get off because it was his job to keep the.
That's the way they were in
Yeah.
the lighthouse service. You kept that light going no matter what. And there's a lot of stories during the hurricane. Of course, at Prudence Island, 5 people killed at the lighthouse station, and everybody except the keeper, basically. And at Palmer's Island in New Bedford, the keeper's wife died. But they all tried to stay at the station. And I know other stories where the keeper spent the night of the hurricane, spent the night in the tower, like just at the light, keeping it going. Even though, of course, there's no boaters who could see the
Right.
light at the.
I remember that when the Coast Guard had contacted my mother, they said the seas were too rough to get out there.
Right.
This
But
is
that
when are we
is-
talking about now?
This was after.
You're after.
Yeah, this was after the storm.
Before the storm, the time when my mother first found out about it, I remember her taking that phone and saying, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. That was Sullivan telling her, the light is gone. The light is gone.
That was how he told her.
That's how he told her. And he was evidently agitated at the time for fear,
But when the Coast Guard did contact her, they said that they haven't been able to get out to the light.
Right. Because
And
the
that as
seas
soon
were
as
too
they
rough.
had more information, they would give it to him. And
And-
that was when the psychic came in.
Yeah.
Well, it
on
was
the
quite
Sunday.
some time.
Well, it was just a couple of days because it was on the Sunday after that the psychic.
The psychic, no, but
Yeah.
I mean, the Coast Guard
Yeah,
couldn't
they
get out
couldn't
there.
get out there, but yet the psychic, when he came,
You're saying after the storm, for
After
a
the
while, it
storm,
was still too rough for the
Because
Coast
Mr. Rumwich and my mother were constantly trying to have them go out to sea,
Guard. Mhm.
you
This
know?
is like the day
it was too
after.
rough. It was too rough. A couple of days after.
Days after, a man,
He came to the house. It was on a Sunday. I know
Mr.
that.
Johnson, Johnson keeps sticking in my head.
And she
It was
at
Sunday
church,
morning. She was at church.
really. He said he'd come back.
What day of the week was the hurricane?
We were in
I
school,
don't
so
know.
it had to
have
be.
been either a
Thursday or
I think
Friday.
It was on a Thursday, a Wednesday or a Thursday, something like that. But I know on the Sunday when he came, he said he'd be back.
This is Mr.
And he
Johnson.
did come back. He told her before he started, I am not here for money, I am not here for, I just want to relate to you what
A
I have
vision
seen."
he
Now, this Mr. Johnson came to the house
Yes,
on
he did.
Sunday?
Came
On the
twice.
Sunday.
Came
Yeah.
first when my mother was at church,
And he came back in the afternoon.
and he came back.
And like he said, he did not want any money, he was not soliciting anything, he just wanted to let her know of a vision that
He had had on his way to
Yeah.
Boston.
And he told her, now nobody's been out to this lighthouse because the seas are too rough.
But he
Right.
told her about the other girl first.
Yeah, well,
There was a girl in Bristol that was lost, they couldn't find. And he told my mother about this, how he had had a vision just like the one he had with her, to go to her, to go to Bristol, that she was in a certain pond, and that he had gone and they had searched and they had found the girl, because she was
Get
dead,
that.
you know.
Yeah.
And then
and he said that the lighthouse
did not.
fall over.
That's what
The
they thought.
floors collapsed one on top of the other. They just went down. All the floors went down. He
The-
said it did not go. The bell went. They never did find that.
The glass enclosure blew off.
But he said that he had a vision that my father was taken off that light.
Now, see, I don't recall it that way.
I recall that what he had said, that he was taken off, whether or not he was dead or alive, had amnesia or was injured, he didn't know, but he was taken off the light by two people in a boat, and one was a woman. This is what he had said.
My memory is not with
Clear
that.
on that one. But,
Okay, my memory is that Mr. Johnson said, your husband is alive. Your husband got off that light. I don't know whether he's alive now or yet, but he got off in the dinghy that was there. And that place, the top blew off, but the rest of it collapsed because the water in the fresh water tank is still fresh and the potatoes are still dry that they stored down there. As Bobby said, no one had been to that light. The Coast Guard couldn't get there.
And he sure couldn't got out of the dinghy either.
And when the Coast Guard did contact her later on, that's exactly what did happen. The floors did collapse. It did not.
And a dinghy was missing.
Well, the dinghy would have been lost anyway, no matter what.
Well, it sounds
Maybe,
certainly
maybe
sounds
not.
sounds plausible.
Who knows?
But we never heard from him again.
Well, he really,
Do you
he
remember-
just wanted to relay.
Can you picture this man at all?
Yeah, I can.
Was
Yeah.
he
He was well dressed.
was he middle aged, older, or
I say,
He was in his 30s.
uh-huh.
Would you say that?
I say 30s, 40s.
Very well spoken,
Yeah.
very well dressed, yes. Of course, naturally, we as kids clung to that story. My mother, being in the state she was in, immediately grabbed, as a last resort onto that. She was called so many times to go so many different places to look at bodies to see if it was his, all over the state,
Yeah.
It really, she died 2 years later.
And do
41,
you,
yeah.
do you directly attribute it to
Well,
that, or
She
well-
died of tuberculosis,
Uh-huh.
but she
She
was,
run down from it.
they've never found my father's body.
It's funny you say that. About 10 years ago, there was an article in the Providence Journal, and it said that there was something there, and the way it wrote it said it could be the uninterested remains of Whale Rock Light.
really?
That's what it said. But the current was so.
Yeah,
and,
that's
And I remember that because it was in their Sunday
That pictorial section.
pictorial section,
Hmm.
and it said it was about 10 years ago. And I was going to write him a letter, and the uninterested remains of
yeah. They
Whale
said
Rock
they
Light.
couldn't dive down there
This
because
is the current.
the way the light was situated on a rock that had the currents.
Did they say it was fairly close to the lighthouse?
Right.
was?
I had a very strange incident happen to me. It was quite a few years ago. My husband was a pharmacist and was in the drugstore that he was working at the time. And I happened to stop in there after church on a Sunday, and there was a very old man in there. And he kept staring at me and staring at me. I've told you this before. Oh, yeah, yeah. And he came up to me and he spoke to me. And he said, he said, you are the spitting image of my granddaughter. And I got thinking about that later on. He said, everything about you. She looks exactly like you. And I resemble my father. My father's side.
She does.
I got the same crooked tooth and everything. And right away you start thinking, did he get off the light? Did he have amnesia? Did he have another family somewhere? Daughter looked like me, you know? So I wanted to find out who this man was, and I found out that he had died the next day. He had died the next day, and it wasn't anyone that was a customer, a regular customer. It was just somebody that probably was just passing through. And his granddaughter lived up in the Boston area, up the coast there, you know?
Yeah.
And it just always left me with a funny feeling.
Yeah.
Did you ever find out their name?
No, because he had died. It was just passing. He was just going through. It wasn't.
How did you know he died?
Because I asked George, I think it was the next day,
Oh, okay.
and somehow or other, you know, he said that he had heard that maybe
George
somebody
knew his
knew him
name.
or something. Yeah.
Well, I think I would have been felt a little
Yeah,
funny
it gives you a
too.
funny feeling. No, because I resemble my father.
Yeah.
So, but it was a weird feeling, especially when you thought that he might have gotten off, and the guy did say he might have amnesia or
Mhm.
Yeah.
something like that.
Anything's possible.
Yeah. But how could he forget his 6 kids, huh?
Maybe that's what gave him amnesia.
Well, it kind of changed everybody's lives a
Yeah.
little bit,
Left the 6 of us.
and a lot happened.
Yeah.
Too much happened. But we
But
were
there-
up until last year all well, and then my brother died last year, the first of the 6th.
Can we go back to before the hurricane that Keeper Sullivan was supposed to have been at the light? He was
Yeah.
Yes, he was coming for the changing of the guards, you might say.
Uh-huh.
And the
Dad-
water was so rough, my father beckoned him to go back
Mm-hmm.
because he didn't feel as though he could get out
He actually-
safely.
He just motioned to him, though.
Yeah. And then Mr. Sullivan felt
The
very
way-
guilty about that. He felt very guilty about
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
The way it appears in a book or two, it's something like that Keeper Sullivan just decided to turn around. It doesn't mention
No,
No.
my father
it. He described that. He said that.
Yeah.
because Mr. Sullivan told us that he had come to the house, that he had beckoned him to go back. The scene was just too rough.
And I think it was because it was hard enough to get on the light the way that it was situated with that thing, with the storm being, so
Oh,
hard.
sure.
He wouldn't have been able to,
To
even if he
land.
got out that far.
Yeah.
Just a
What we
storm.
always thought is, being a Navy man, my father would have headed for the light to keep it going.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Most
where he
likely.
would have gone.
Most likely.
In fact, that's what the Coast Guard thought, that after they found out it had collapsed, that he must have gone for the light and it blew over. Of course, we don't know that with everything else that transpired.
No, they could tell from the remains of the lighthouse that it did
Yeah,
collapse.
yeah,
like
all
yeah.
floor upon floor, it said.
Potatoes were dry, water was fresh. If he had gone, he would have been alive.
I suppose there's always hindsight.
Oh yeah, it's always so much
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
That really took toll on my mother though.
It's going to be so hard when there's no
Yeah.
plan. I mean,
Yeah,
it's-
you can't have closure.
I have a feeling this might end up being maybe like 2 pages in the magazine with the article and a few pictures, and
That'll be nice. At least you'd be setting the story straight.
that's what I want to do.
I hope everyone was able to hear everything that was said in that interview. As I said when I originally recorded it, it was to help with an article, but I'm glad I was able to save it and use it in this podcast. Michelle, you know how bad some of our recent storms have been, but I hope we never have another one like the hurricane of 1938.
I agree with that, Jeremy. I hope we never see anything like that here. Clearly, I was not around then to see that hurricane.
Yeah,
Hopefully, I never have to see something like that.
I sure hope not. Our storms in January were really bad.
Bad
but-
enough, yeah.
Yeah, not as bad as the hurricane of 38, and that was a storm of a century, really. Next, we're going to hear an interview I just did with David Robinson. David is the State Underwater Archaeologist for the state of Massachusetts and director of the Massachusetts Board of Underwater Archaeological Resources. Back when he was based in Rhode Island, he was the first person to study the underwater remains of Whale Rock Lighthouse. He was also the driving force behind a memorial to keeper Walter Eberle. It was great to get back in touch with David for this podcast. Let's listen to that conversation now. I'm speaking today with underwater archaeologist David Robinson, and it's so nice to be back in touch with you, David. We were in touch quite a few years ago related to Whale Rock Lighthouse, our subject for today. So thank you so much for doing this today, David.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for asking me, Jeremy.
Absolutely. As I said, mainly we want to talk about Whale Rock Lighthouse today, but if we could start with a little bit about your personal background, how did you get interested in underwater archaeology in the first place?
Well, I grew up with the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau on TV once a week that I absolutely loved. And I had a great aunt, my Aunt Helen, that lived in Charlestown, Massachusetts. And when the Boston Aquarium first opened, she took me to the aquarium. And while the fish and everything were really cool, it was the divers that caught my attention. And my father had been a commercial diver, and his great uncle had been a Navy diver. So there was underwater in our family's history and background. And then, I was born in the ocean state. And so I was always surrounded by ships in the sea. And growing up in Narragansett, Rhode Island, I had friends whose dads were commercial fishermen. And again, so that was exposing me to seafaring life and so forth. And my mother, she taught me to be a reader, and she also got me interested in history. And then as a 10th grade student at Narragansett High School, a friend of mine, Peter Manning, and we had just gotten certified to be scuba divers when we were 15. And we dived on the wreck of the steamship Rhode Island, which has a connection to Whale Rock Light. We didn't know it at the time, but we did some historical research at the Narragansett Public Library. And anyway, to make a short story long, we turned in a project to our history teacher, and we got an A on it. And it planted a seed in my brain at the time that you could do applied research and have an academic role or purpose and have success with it. And it was just a fascinating thing to do. Fast forward to when high school's ending, and I've gone to get an anthropology and art degree at the University of Rhode Island, and now I'm thinking about, oh boy, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I had received for a Christmas present from my father-in-law, Carol Harrington, a book called The Sea Remembers, written by Peter Throckmorton. And it was also about the same time that the Titanic had been found. And there was a project on the cover of National Geographic, the world's oldest shipwreck in Turkey at a place called Ulu Barun. It was being excavated by graduate students and faculty at Texas A&M University and the nautical archaeology program there. And so I thought, wow, I would love to be the photographer taking the pictures on these kinds of projects. And it seems to me that in order for me to be able to do something like that, I need credentials. So I probably need to get a graduate degree in underwater archaeology. Mm-hmm. So I applied. There was the only place I applied to Texas A&M, and I got in. And so this kid from the ocean state went to the Central Plains of Texas to learn about underwater archaeology. I've been professionally employed as an underwater archaeologist since 1991. Uh-huh. And it worked all over the place.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I was looking at your bio on LinkedIn, some of your past positions, and I know you've been doing, well, you said about 30 years or so you've been doing this?
Yeah, I think this is year 33 I'm in now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. And a lot of you're based in Massachusetts now, but you've worked around New England, obviously Rhode Island, I think Vermont actually for a while as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I did my my graduate field schools in Vermont and Lake Champlain. Mm-hmm. And we were our field schools were a collaboration with the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum and the University of Vermont. So I absolutely fell in love with Vermont, and some of my first jobs in the field were working for the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum. And then I ended up transitioning to a job in Maryland, working for the largest cultural resource management company in the country at the time, our Christopher Goodwin and Associates, and got a lot of experience working in the Mid-Atlantic and in the Gulf of Mexico and the rivers of the southeastern U.S. And then came back to Vermont Was there for a few years and then ended up back in Rhode Island working at the Public Archaeology Lab in Pawtucket and working throughout New England and the Mid-Atlantic in that position. And then in 2012, started my own company doing consulting underwater archaeology, and then also started working full-time as a underwater researcher and archaeologist at the University of Rhode Island's Graduate School of Oceanography. I was a co-principal investigator on a 7-year project to develop methodologies for identifying ancient cultural landforms that have been inundated by sea level rise offshore.
Cool. Yeah. I want to get into that subject a little bit before we're done today, but just to back up a little bit, what you were saying about your early experience as a kid. Yeah, I grew up in Lynn, Mass, near Boston, so the New England Aquarium was a very special place to me, and I love seeing those divers too in that big tank. I didn't become a diver like you, but I wanted to be a marine biologist through a lot of my childhood. That didn't quite happen, but it's always been an interest, and certainly I think Jacques Cousteau inspired a lot of people. I've talked to others who said the same thing. So what got you interested in Whale Rock Lighthouse?
So we moved to Narragansett in 1973, and I remember seeing the cylindrical base of the lighthouse perched on top of the long Whale Rock that was awash in the surf. And when I first saw it, I thought, gosh, that looks like a submarine. It looks like the conning tower or the sail of a submarine moving through the water. And so I was interested in it, and I was on the school bus one morning going to school, and I asked one of my friends who had lived in Narragansett a lot longer than me, and I said, hey, I saw this thing. What is that? And so he told me the story, though it wasn't an accurate story, but he told me a story about a family being on Whale Rock Light, and everyone dying in the hurricane of 1938 except for this boy. And I think he conflated, there was another lighthouse that was destroyed where something similar to that happened. So I think he conflated the stories. But in telling me the story now, I was just absolutely, every time I went by this lighthouse and could see it from shore, I'd be transfixed. I was just absolutely intrigued by its story and this thing out there, and always thought, boy, it'd be really interesting to be able to go out to that and take a look at it more closely.
Yeah. I think your friend was mixing it up with Prudence Island Lighthouse in Narragansett Bay, at which 5 people died in the hurricane. It was the keeper who survived. He was washed back to shore by a wave, and somebody grabbed him, but 5 other people died. So when did you first dive at Whale Rock to look for the remains of the lighthouse?
The first time I went out to Whale Rock Light to dive, it wasn't to see if we could find any remains of the lighthouse. We were just going out for fun. It was a recreational dive. It was before I became an underwater archaeologist, and friend of mine who grew up in Narragansett, Bob Falvey, had a little boat that we took out there, and it was on the very first dive that we were there. I was exploring around the northwest side of the rock, and the rock, it's a tricky place to dive. It's totally exposed to open ocean, and the tidal currents are really strong there, so you have to time your dives around the tide. But the rock kind of sticks up off a pretty flat and featureless silty sand bottom, and the water depth around the rock is about 50 feet. And so, this rock is like a pinnacle that sticks up off the bottom. Anyway, I was on the northwest side just exploring in the rocks, and I noticed this pattern of these seaweed covered lumps on the bottom. And I also noticed that there was sort of this flat, platey kind of appearance to the rocks where I was. And, the underwater visibility with a dive light was probably 4 feet, 5 feet. So I'm kind of flashing the light around in the dark and looking at these lumps and realizing that they're in lines. And then as I started to kind of scan them a little bit more of a distance, I realized that they were patterned. And then I just immediately realized that I was looking at the curved iron plates of the lighthouse's structure, and the lumps were the rivets or the bolts holding the metal plates together.
Tell me again, how deep is the water we're talking about?
So the water in that location right around the base of the rock is about 50 feet This was we made this dive. This is the first dive was in 1988, and I've only been out there I think one or two other times since, and both times it was quite a while ago. So I'd have to look at a chart to see exactly what it was from my dive log. But yeah, it was about 50 feet deep.
How did what you saw there, the remains of the lighthouse, compare with what you might have expected? Different?
Well, there was some similarities. You know, I'd seen pictures of lighthouses like it, so I knew that there were these iron plates or cylinders that had bolts or rivets on them. And then as we came around and came up a little shallower on the rock, kind of crammed into some of the nooks and crannies of the rock, there were sections of railing, there were other parts, other components of the lighthouse. And so we weren't surprised. I wasn't surprised to see these things, but it wasn't until much later. So now fast forwarding to when we moved back to Rhode Island after being in Vermont most recently. So now we're talking about the early 2000s, that I thought, geez, I'm an underwater archaeologist and I've got some experience and we've moved back to Rhode Island. I want to go out and take a closer look at the site. And I also knew that we were coming up on an anniversary of the hurricane. And I think that's probably when you and I first got in touch with each other. I contacted you. I realized that you were writing books and doing lots of research on lighthouses. And the internet was a tool for doing research then that was kind of new. And so I think I reached out to you to try to get in touch with the children, Walter's children, to talk to them, see what they remembered. Also I talked to you and I talked to them about having a memorial service for their dad, because none of what I read had I seen that had happened. I didn't think that he had been memorialized. And it just seemed like the right thing to do.
When you examined what was underwater there, what do you think happened to the lighthouse in the hurricane?
Well, the impression I got from what I saw in that first dive was that the structure, the cylinders that formed the tower, the lighthouse tower, the impression I got based on these fragments all around on the bottom, basically everywhere I could see, there was these pieces all around the base of the northwest side of the light. They were all maybe anywhere from 2.5 to 4 or 5 feet in size. So they were broken up into fairly small pieces. It gave me the impression of somebody taking a deck of cards and throwing them up in the air and then dropping on the floor. And that made me think of the destruction being almost like an explosion, sort of a catastrophic boom. This thing just shattered and came apart. And then I started thinking about what we, learned from the work that was done on the Titanic, and how, started thinking about the tensile strength of cast iron. It's not very good. It tends to not be very flexible. In my mind's eye, I just had this vision of this thing kind of coming apart, sort of in a single catastrophic moment.
There's pretty strong currents there, of course. Would that account for any of that sort of scattered nature of these plates there?
Yeah, I mean, currents are definitely going to move things around. The power of the water flow is strong, but they weren't scattered over I wouldn't say a large distance. It was just they were everywhere within my visual field around the base of the rock. So they were pretty concentrated, just out into the mud and the sand, just off the base of the rock. So they didn't move very far, and of course they were really heavy.
Yeah. So did the cylinders didn't really survive intact at all? It's just individual plates or sections of the cylinders, that sort of thing.
Yeah, they were. You could see the curve in them from them being part of a circular thing. There was that curve, but they were broken into pieces, into fragments, and all just kind of stacked on top of each other, laying on the bottom.
Yeah. I want to read you something, just a paragraph from an official Lighthouse Service report. I'm sure you've read this. It was done right after the loss of the lighthouse in the hurricane. The person who examined it wrote, quote, "It would appear that the top 2 stories, watchroom and lantern, broke loose from the lower 2 stories and went overboard. Most keepers at other similar stations who were on duty during the storm stated that they took refuge in the top story. The deceased keeper of Whale Rock was undoubtedly in the same place when the top portion of the tower went. With the top gone and brick lining weakened, the remaining 2 floors dropped down, probably distorting the shell plates sufficiently to collapse them. What do you think of that? I don't know if you have any comments on that report.
Well, I have read that. I remember when I read it, I thought, I don't think that's what happened. That's not the sense I got. No, I haven't done any real scientific research to refute or support my hypothesis. So,
Yeah.
it's just an intuitive thing. But it made me think of Dot's description of what she saw after she had come home from school and she was looking for her mother.
Yep.
And she saw the what I think is the tidal wave of the hurricane that came into First Beach and destroyed all the structures on the beach and washed cars with friends from school into the water on the other side. But she described it as being like a 2-story high wall of water coming in suddenly. And so when you start thinking about West Passage and how it would have funneled that wall of water, because of the narrowing of the mouth of the bay there, and then also it gets fairly shallow. I mean, 50 feet's not very deep for that big of a stretch of water. I would just think that it would have magnified that wave, that tidal surge, whatever it was. And I mean, Whale Rock Light is like right in the teeth of that. So to me, again, these bits and pieces of information lead me to think that it was a quick thing.
Yeah. Well, I think one difference, I don't know if anybody dove back then in 1938, dived to look at it like you did. So that certainly makes a difference. You got more of a firsthand impression. Another thing they talked about at that time is that they noticed that it wasn't so well bolted to the rock, I guess, as it probably should have been. I don't know how much that contributed to it going down, but maybe it would have been destroyed anyway. It's hard to say. Another thing, I don't know if I ever mentioned to you, a woman emailed me, I think it was short around the time when I wrote some articles about this, quite a few years ago now. And she said that I think it was her grandfather was a ham radio operator in the area. And he was actually talking to Walter Eberle just before the storm was coming in.
Wow.
And Eberle told him on the radio, he said, "This is really weird. The water," I don't think he used the word weird, but strange that the water was so low in the bay there. He had never seen it anywhere near that low, and he was wondering what was going on. Of course, that often, I think, precedes something like a tidal wave, right, where the water will go super low. So that was interesting.
Wow.
So I think that radio operator was certainly the last person to speak to Walter Eberle. Yeah. When you were diving around there, did you ever find anything else of interest? I know there were a number of shipwrecks there over the years.
In doing background research, it sounded like there were 6 different vessels that ended their existence on that rock, or as a result of hitting that rock. I didn't see any evidence of any of those wrecks when we were there. We did, in addition to doing the diving in the 80s and then again in the early 2000s, we did do a magnetometer and a side scan sonar survey around the rock, as close as we could get, and did find you could see that the debris extended around the rock, but it didn't look like it went very far, and that seems to make sense given the soft sediments that are kind of around the rock. I think anything, people have always wondered what happened to the lens, what happened to the lantern. Certainly the waves and the storm surge during the hurricane would have pushed those things, I think, way to the north somewhere. And they also, these heavy pieces of metal and things would have sunk into the sediments too, or been buried by the transport of silt on the bottom there. So it could be that there's quite a bit that's buried in those softer sediments. But the only wreck that that we spent any time looking at or researching was the steamboat, the Rhode Island, which, because of its demise and there not being a light on Whale Rock, and it was such a massive steamship, and there were so many influential people that were investors and owners of that vessel and involved in that business, that they were able to lobby for the funding to finally get a lighthouse put on Whale Rock. So there's that interesting connection between that first wreck that I was diving on as a 15-year-old, and then its connection to Whale Rock even being in existence. It's pretty kind of ironic.
Yeah. You mentioned the lens. I was thinking that when this happened, the lens probably shattered into many pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that surprising that, like you said, it's some of it may be buried, some of it just got swept away.
Yep.
But I wouldn't expect to find an intact lens or anything like that.
No.
So you mentioned the memorial a few minutes ago, and you had a lot to do with establishing a memorial to Walter Eberle, and you and I were in touch a lot around that time. Why did you feel there needed to be a memorial to him?
Well, as I started to talk to you and do the background research into the story of the light, and realized how poignant and tragic it was that Walter, the father, husband and the father of these 6 young kids that grew up without him, it being, a time when, it was a catastrophe. It was a massive catastrophe. So memorializing one person lost in that catastrophe, I guess, just it wasn't possible. It didn't happen for whatever reason. And I thought that was sad. I didn't think that was, it didn't sit well with me. And given that we were coming up on I think it was at the time, what was it, the 60th anniversary?
70th. It was 2008,
70th.
so it would have been 70.
70th,
yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That seemed like an appropriate time to do it. And that's when I reached out to the Coast Guard to see if we could do something, and also to the Beavertail Lighthouse folks to see if we could get a plaque installed inside the museum there that would allow people to, and then also I talked to them about, and they've done it, putting a plaque outside that you could look at and then see the base of the lighthouse out on Whale Rock, and read about what had happened and the sacrifice that Walter Eberle had made in manning that lighthouse during the worst storm that we've ever seen in this area. So it just seemed like the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think so too. And just for people who might not know, the museum you're referring to is the Beavertail Lighthouse Museum in Jamestown.
Yes.
From which you can obviously see the remains of the lighthouse there, as you said. And there was an event, a dedication event for the plaque as you said, on the anniversary of the hurricane in 2008. You and I both spoke at that. I was honored and humbled to have the chance to speak at that with some family members, with some of his children present and everything. So pretty memorable. I don't know if you have any further thoughts on that day in particular, that whole experience.
It was beautiful. It was a beautiful day. Some of his children were there, his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And there was a pretty good crowd. It was, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 people.
Yep.
Many of whom are his family members and extended family members. And I remember when we finished the ceremony with taps, that being incredibly moving and
I remember
so
that.
fitting. And it chokes me up now just thinking about it. It was absolutely beautiful. And I know his family greatly appreciated our words and the effort to remember their dad.
Yeah, I know they did. And yeah, I was quite moved that day as well. Let me ask you a general question. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about the future of lighthouses in this age of rising sea levels and more frequent severe storms. And before you answer that, I'll just mention, you may or may not have heard that, we had back-to-back coastal storms in January, the 10th and 13th, that were really bad. I'm on the New Hampshire seacoast. It was really bad around here and up the Maine coast. And more than 20 light stations suffered damage in those storms, including Portsmouth Harbor Light, my local lighthouse here, very severe damage to the base of the lighthouse. So anyway, any thoughts about the future of lighthouse preservation with these things we're facing at this point?
Well, we know that the sea level is rising, and I don't think there's anything we can really do to stop that from happening, and certainly in the short term. And whenever I hear conversations about, what do we do and how do we respond, I always think of being a child building sandcastles at low tide at the beach. And then as the tide comes in, you do all you can to prevent your castle from getting destroyed. You dig the moats, and you build the walls, and you do all this stuff to protect your castle, but inevitably it goes underwater, and that's that. I think the only thing we can do for these lighthouses that are in these vulnerable positions along the coast is to enjoy them while we can, potentially move them to higher ground, and certainly make sure they're well documented so that if they are accidentally destroyed in a storm, at least we have a record of what was there. And
yeah.
Beyond that, I don't know what else there is we could really do.
Yeah. Your thinking is pretty much the same as mine. But I love the analogy. It's not a happy analogy, but it's a good analogy to the child's sandcastles. And I also, part of my thinking too is basically nothing lasts forever. People like to say lighthouses are America's castles. They don't mean sandcastles, but
Right.
compared to the castles of Europe. But look at the castles of Europe; most of them are in ruins. So at least something remains, and we have the history of them. So I completely agree with everything you said. So I have one final question for you for bonus points. Okay, that question is: what is your favorite thing about underwater archaeology?
My favorite thing about underwater archaeology is that everybody thinks it's cool, and it allows me to connect with all kinds of different people from all walks of life to talk about what I do for a job, what I do for a career, and to share with them my excitement and interest in the extraordinary history that we have preserved underwater here in New England. It's just a joy to share people's excitement, and it always recharges my batteries for what I do, because people think what we do is important and they're interested in hearing about it. And it's just great to get to talk to people about the work I do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, nicely said, and it is cool. It's very cool what you do, and it's very cool what you did for in memory of Walter Eberle. It was an important thing to establish that memorial. So I must have thanked you a few times at the time, but I'm thanking you again now for making that happen. It was a memorable day, certainly, when we dedicated that. It's great talking with you again, David, today after all these years. I think it's probably been more than 10 years since we were last in touch. So great connecting with you again. And maybe we can talk more about saving our sandcastles, that type of thing. But I wish you all the best in your position there in Massachusetts now. And again, thanks for your time today.
You bet, Jeremy. Thank you so much. It's great to see you and great to talk to you again.
The destruction caused by the hurricane of 1938 was incredible. Michelle, help me out with some of the figures.
Sure, Jeremy. The exact number of deaths isn't known, but it was probably close to 700. There were more than 1,700 injuries, more than 8,900 structures in New England were destroyed, and more than 26,000 cars were damaged or destroyed. There was more than $400 million in damages, which in today's money would be more than $8 billion.
Wow, that's a lot. The hurricane, after it hit the coast, it kind of plowed inland and run right up through Vermont and destroyed millions of trees. I believe some of the forest areas still haven't totally recovered from that. 7 people died at lighthouses in the storm, including family members of keepers and one former keeper. But Walter Eberle was the only lighthouse keeper who lost his life while on duty in the hurricane of 1938. He was simply doing his job like so many lighthouse keepers through hundreds of years in this country. He was a hero, but all lighthouse keepers were heroes.
The author Jodi Picoult once wrote, "In reality, you don't ever change the hurricane. You just learn how to stay out of its path."
I'll add one other quote to that. The 19th century Connecticut lighthouse keeper Kate Moore once said, "The sea is a treacherous friend." I think that pretty much sums it up. We will be back with a new episode next week. For now, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thanks so much for listening, and
keep a good light.